Morning, guys. It's 4 a.m. and I just recorded 30 minutes of reading and then I accidentally hit the wrong button. So I'm going to do this again and it's going to be as good as it was before. And we're going to be at 88. Just real quick, I've had some people ask me about the timeline and the first quiz you took on paper. I'm going to have you guys take a picture of your completed timeline and email it to me by Friday. I'll put that on the announcements on Google Classroom. And then I'm also, unfortunately, having you take a picture of your quiz would be a lot because it'll end up being like 4 pages and I'll have like 80 kids doing that. So what I think I'm going to do is send you a digital version of the quiz and you can transfer your answers onto that. If that's okay, I'm really sorry. I really thought we would be back to school by now. So it's kind of a pain. I'm sorry, but from now on everything will be digital. So today we are going to be on 88 and we're going to go to 97. This is one of my favorite parts of the reading because Montag tells off Mildred's friends, which is kind of awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. I feel like I'm losing my voice. And then as I go along, I'll kind of explain things to you. Just make sure when you're looking at that discussion board, if Miss A or I post something within the discussion board feed, make sure you read it and you respond to it as well. Make sure you're spending time with your family. And at the end of the reading, I'm going to explain the grading again because you guys have got to fill out that Google form because I need to know how I'm grading you. I have to have that in a spreadsheet for the school by Friday. All right, so let's get started. 88. Montag has just left Faber, the English professor who's finally decided to help him. Montag is going to take his money and photocopy or make copies of some books and possibly plant them in firemen's houses. And so then they'll get caught and their houses will be burned. And then people in the U.S. will start to question, like, why are these firemen reading books? They weren't supposed to be reading books. Maybe there's something in books I should read. 88. And know that, obviously there's a new war getting ready to start, and those fighter jets above the head in the sky are just kind of, I would say, building up to something big that's going to happen. So just be aware of that's kind of building suspense. That's called a motif when a reoccurring image happens in a book. So the motif of this book for sure is those jets. Okay. Just like if you remember reading Unbroken last year about the guy who his plane goes down and he's in the Pacific Ocean with his 2 friends, Louis Zamperini. A motif in Unbroken would probably be for sure the sharks over and over again. They kind of symbolize this impending death. The Pacific Ocean could be a motif too, and it kind of symbolizes like a purgatory, and it's talked about over and over. 88. You could feel the war getting ready in the sky that night, the way the clouds moved aside and came back, and the way the stars looked, a million of them swimming between the clouds like the enemy discs, and the feeling that the sky might fall upon the city and turn it to chalk dust, and the moon might go up in a red fire. That was how the night felt. Montag walked from the subway with the money in his pocket. He had visited the bank, which was open all night, every night, with robot tellers in attendance. That's where he kind of fantasizes the idea of the ATM that hadn't been created yet. And as he walked, he was listening to the seashell radio in one ear. "We have mobilized 1 million men. Quick victory is ours if the war comes." Music flooded over the voice quickly, and it was gone. 10 million men mobilized, Faber's voice whispered into his other ear. "But say 1 million. It's happier." Did you notice how, like, it says, "Hey, we've mobilized 1 million men. If the war comes, we'll win." And then it goes right back to music. That's really interesting. Like, you don't want to tell the people too much. You don't want them to be scared. Faber? Yes? I'm not thinking. I'm just doing like I was told. Like always. You said get the money and I got it. I didn't really think of it myself. When do I start working things out on my own? You've started already by saying what you just said. You'll have to take me on faith. I took the others on faith. Yes, and look where you're headed. And look where we're headed. You have to travel blind for a while. Here's my arm to hold on to. I don't want to change sides and just be told what to do. That's no reason to change if I do that. You're wise already. Montag felt his feet moving him on the sidewalk towards his house. Keep talking. Would you like me to read to you? I'll read so you can remember. I'll go to bed. I only go to bed 5 hours a night, nothing to do. So if you'd like, I'll read to you to sleep nights. They say you retain knowledge even when you're sleeping. If someone whispers it in your ear, yes, here, far away across town in the night, the faintest whisper of a turned page. The Book of Job. You know, it's interesting that Ray Bradbury writes a book about the value of books. And he specifically picks certain books, right? Books that have pores, that you learn from, that you read, you have leisure to read, and then you take what you've read and you make changes. So he picks the book of Job, and if you know anything about the book of Job in the Bible, Job was a very faithful man to God. And as the story goes, Satan tried to tempt him and say, oh, if horrible things happen to you, you wouldn't be faithful to God anymore. And Job said, I would absolutely be faithful to God. You could do anything to me, and I would still have faith in God. So Job's faith is challenged. Everybody in his family dies. He loses everything. He loses his farm. His health is atrocious. He has boils all over his entire body. And the story goes that Job does not lose faith. So then God rewards him handsomely, and he has more than he ever had before. It's kind of this idea that both Job and Montag are beaten down men, and they're searching for answers. So I think that's really interesting that Ray Bradbury picks the book of Job. The moon rose in the sky as Montag walked, his lips moving just a trifle. He was eating a light supper at 9 in the evening when the front door cried out in the hall, and Mildred ran from the parlor like a native fleeing an eruption of Vesuvius. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles came through the front door and vanished into the volcano's mouth with martinis in hand. They're heading to the parlor room, which, just so you know, a parlor room is just a living room. But they call it a parlor room because all of the walls are TVs. So it's kind of like having a movie theater in your living room with they have three, some people have four, with 3 different walls covered in TV from the ceiling to the floor, and many times the TV is playing 3 different or 4 different TV shows, and it's just blasting at you. Montag stopped eating. They were like a monstrous crystal chandelier tinkling in 1,000 chimes. He saw their Cheshire cat smiles burning through the walls of the house, and now they were screaming at each other above the din. Montag found himself at the parlor door and his food still in his mouth. Doesn't everyone look nice? Nice. You look fine, Millie. Fine. Everyone looks swell. Swell. Montag stood watching them. Patience, whispered Faber. I shouldn't be in here, whispered Montag almost to himself. I should be on my way to you with the money. Tomorrow's time enough. Careful. Isn't this show wonderful? Cried Mildred. Wonderful. On one wall, a woman smiled and drank orange juice simultaneously. How does she do both at once? Thought Montag insanely. In the other walls, an X-ray of the same woman revealed the contracting journey of the refreshing beverage on its way to her delighted stomach. Abruptly, the room took off on a rocket flight into the sky in the clouds. It plunged into a lime-green sea where bluefish ate redfish and yellowfish. A minute later, 3 white cartoon clowns chopped off each other's limbs to the accompaniment of an immense incoming tide of laughter. 2 minutes more, and the room whipped out of the town to the jet cars wildly circling an arena, bashing and backing up and bashing each other again. Montag saw a number of bodies fly in the air. So it's like, even the TV shows are quick. Remember that Ray Bradbury wrote this book in response to the creation of the TV. He said it would be the downfall of society. He called it the idiot box. And he's already predicting that TV shows are going to become like commercials. Quick, quick, quick. Now this, now this, now this. You ever watch a TV show and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. Nothing is happening. That's it. I've even been guilty of saying before, oh, I don't like to watch really hardcore stuff where I gotta think because I think all day. That's probably not the best way to do things. And I think it's really interesting. He talks about like all the things going on, the white clown, the lady drinking orange juice, the cars smashing into each other. And it made me think about, what do you watch that has violence, that has real violence, or like reality violence? My husband loves to watch those fail armies. Oh my gosh. I can't watch people get hurt. It makes me sad. Or like I watch UFC. I love to see people get beat up. And he's kind of already predicting those things, right? Violence and bloodshed, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, boxing's been around forever, but just this idea that humans enjoy watching pain is pretty interesting. Millie, did you see that? I saw it. Montag reached inside the parlor wall and pulled the main switch. The images drained away as if the water had been let out from a gigantic crystal bowl of hysterical fish. I love that. Like, it just drains out and everything goes to gray. I love that imagery. The three women turned slowly and looked with unconcealed irritation and then dislike at Montag. When do you suppose the war will start? He said. I noticed your husbands aren't here tonight. Oh, they come and go, said Mrs. Phelps. In again, out again, Flanagan. The Army called Pete yesterday. He'll be back next week. The Army said so. Quick war. 48 hours, they said, and everybody home. That's what the Army said. Quick war. Pete was called yesterday, and they said he'd be back next week. Quick. Do you notice how these women talk in such like segmented, choppy sentences, and they just repeat themselves over and over? That's because of what they've watched. Think about like that Denham's Dentifrice commercial I read about. It's just a constant, just quick, short, choppy sentences. Repeat, repeat, repeat. There's no complexity. It's just all simple. And I kind of think of it as like if somebody has just like texted for a really long time and then they have to sit down and write like a formal paper, it's very difficult because of the way they text or the way that they talk to their friends is not how you would write a formal paper. So, but these people, I mean, Ray Bradbury's saying, like, you continue to watch TV and not be educated and not read, and you are going to talk the way they talk. I mean, in education, they say, you have to hear good readers read, and you have to read good writers to become a good writer. The three women fidgeted and looked nervously at the empty mud-colored walls. I'm not worried, said Mrs. Phelps. I'll let Pete do all the worrying, she giggled. I'll let old Pete do all the worrying. Not me. I'm not worried. It's always someone else's husband that dies, they say. I've heard that too. I've never known any dead man killed in a war. Killed jumping off of buildings, yes, like Gloria's husband last week. But not from wars. No, not from wars, Mrs. Phelps said. Anyway, Pete and I already said no tears, nothing like that. It's our third marriage each, and we're independent. Be independent, we always said. He said, if I get killed off, you just go right ahead and don't cry. But get married again and don't think about me. The downfall of marriage. He says, essentially Ray Bradbury is saying that, divorce is going to become commonplace. There's going to be a lot of people who get divorced. And marriages are going to be contracts. They're contractual. They're not emotional, connecting. Everybody's independent of one another. I think that's really poetic because we see that today. We see that divorce is very commonplace. Obviously, over 50% of our population has been divorced. And, there's many reasons to get divorced, so I'm not judging anyone at all. But then also this idea that marriages are not about love. And this is when I get into my feelings, and I would go on a tirade about how I feel marriage should be. But I don't want to videotape myself doing that. But I will tell you that I think the downfall of marriage is when two people believe that they can coexist independently of each other. Men want to be heard, and they want to be respected. The minute that a woman is independent of her husband and does not hear and respect him is the minute she'll lose him. And that doesn't mean he's going to go out and cheat, but she'll lose him emotionally. He's got no skin in the game. If he knows he's not needed, then he knows he can be discarded. I know that I would be okay without my husband, but that's not what this is about. I want to be with him. I adore him. And I want him to feel like I need him, because I do. I need my husband. And I think our society has taught women especially that you don't need anybody. But needing someone or wanting someone is not weak. I want to have a partner. I want one. I need a partner. And that's fine if you don't want to get married, you don't believe in it. That's your prerogative. I'm kind of old school. And I think that if you decide to get married, if that's your thing, be aware that you can be an independent person, but you are a partnership. And the minute you are no longer a partnership, you're going off and doing your own thing, it's not worth it anymore. It's not. And your spouse will feel that. And he predicted it. Because this was the 1950s. People were not going to get divorced in the 1950s. That reminds me, said Mildred. Did you see that Clara dove 5-minute romance last night in your walls? Well, it was all about a woman who... Montag said nothing, but stood looking at the women's faces as he had once looked at the face of saints in a strange church he had entered when he was a child. The faces of those enameled creatures meant nothing to him, though he talked to them and stood at the church for a long time, trying to be of that religion, trying to know what that religion was, trying to get enough of the raw incense and special dust of the place into his lungs, and thus into his blood, to feel touched and concerned by the meaning of the colorful men and women with the porcelain eyes and the blood ruby lips. But there was nothing. Nothing. It was a stroll through another store, and his currency strange and unusable there, and his passion cold, even when he touched the wood and plaster and clay. So it was now in his own parlor, with these women twisting in their chairs under his gaze, lighting cigarettes, blowing smoke, touching their sun-fried hair, and examining their blood-blazing fingernails as if they had caught fire from his look. Their faces grew haunted in silence. They leaned forward at the sound of Montag swallowing his final bit of food. They listened to his feverish breathing. The 3 empty walls of the room were like the pale brows of a sleeping giant now, empty of dreams. Montag felt that if you touched these 3 staring brows, you could feel a fine salt sweat on your fingertips. The perspiration gathered with the silence and the subaudible trembling around and about and in the women who were burning with tension. Any moment they might hiss a long, sputtering hiss and explode. So he says that he's looking at the parlor and the women are talking, and it reminds him of a time when he had went to a church and he had seen these beautiful saint statues, and he tried to connect, and he tried to feel their religion, and he tried to be these people, but he felt empty, like he didn't belong there, like his money wasn't usable, right? And now he looks at these women and he sees their hair is fried by the sun, and they got their nails painted, and you know those women, the ones that look really put together, but when you get close up to them, they've had so much Botox that you can't see them smile, like it doesn't affect their face. They're duded up, and they're not themselves. I think that this coronavirus situation is going to cause women to not be able to dudied up. That's what my husband says. They're not going to be able to pretty themselves and change their looks. And I mean, don't get me wrong, my gray is going to start to show and I'm going to freak out. And of course, my nails are not painted. But it's simplifying us. It's breaking us down to the bare bones. And right now, these women are the real housewives of LA, essentially, right? And he's looking at them and he's like, they have no depth. They are simple. And he looks at the TVs and he feels like these TVs are like eyebrows on a monster. And if he were to touch the brow, if he were to touch the TV, you could almost feel the nervous sweat off the brow as the women wait for the TV to be turned back on. Montag moved his lips. "Let's talk." The women jerked and stared. "How's your children, Mrs. Phelps?" he asked. "You know I haven't any. No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children," said Mrs. Phelps, not quite sure why she was angry with this man. "I wouldn't say that," said Mrs. Bowles. "I have 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby. The world must reproduce, you know. The race must go on. Besides, they sometimes look like you, and that's kind of nice. 2 cesareans turn the trick. Yes, sir. Oh, my doctor said cesareans aren't necessary. You've got the hips for it. Everything's normal. But I insisted." Interesting. Do people have the ability to choose cesarean section even if they could have natural labor? Yes, my sister did it. It's like quick and easy. But so there's that. He definitely predicted that. "Cesarean or not, children are ruinous. You're out of your mind," said Mrs. Phelps. "I pluck my children in school 9 days out of 10. I put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not bad at all. You heave them into the parlor and turn on the switch. It's like washing clothes. Stuff laundry in and slam the lid," Mrs. Bowles teetered. "They'd just as soon kick as kiss you. Thank God I can kick back." Parenting. You put your kid in school, you take them out of school, you do a bunch of stuff with them, you put them to bed. They would rather kick than kiss me. That's funny she says that. They'd rather kick me than kiss me, but I can kick back. This reminds me of parents that send their kids to school from 7:30 to 3:30 every day. Pick their kids up, take them to dance lessons, then music lessons, then pick up dinner for them at the Dairy Queen and have them eat it in the car, and then take them home and make them get a bath and then put them in front of a TV and send them to bed. There's no relationship. Yes, it's fine and good for your kids to be in activities, but when your kid is jumping from activity to activity and is eating in the car every night, we're missing something. You've got to have balance. You cannot do that every night. And that's what I'm thinking about now. There's no activities. There's no shopping. There's no Dairy Queen drive-thru every night. Obviously they're open, but people aren't supposed to go outside. How are those parents dealing with the fact that their new normal is difficult? Is not what they're used to, obviously. It's a new normal. And that they are having to build relationships again. And many of them want to. They get into this routine, this rut of taking their kids to all these lessons, and then they can't stop because the kid likes it. Sometimes they don't like it. But Ray Bradbury predicted this. And now we don't have any of that. We've got to connect. You've got to build relationships. And hopefully people aren't just sitting at home watching Netflix all day long. That doesn't mean you have to sit and stare at your family for 24 hours a day. You have to have balance, but our world needed to stop for a second. And I don't believe in any way the coronavirus should happen at all. But I think in the middle of devastation, you have to find a silver lining. And this is the silver lining. People are building relationships again. Okay. The women showed their tongues, laughing. Mildred sat a moment and then, seeing that Guy was still in the doorway, clapped her hands. Let's talk politics to please Guy." "Oh, sounds fine," said Mrs. Bowles. "I voted last election, same as everyone, and I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men ever become president." "Oh, but the man that ran against him. Oh, he wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely and didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well." Superficial. So you had one candidate that was fine, and then you had one that was a hot mess. All they care about is the looks. It's just the surface, guys. "What possessed the outs to run him? You just don't go running a little short man like that against a tall man. Besides, he mumbled. Half the time I couldn't hear a word he said. And the words I did hear, I didn't understand." Probably because he was smart. Fat, too, and didn't dress to hide it. No wonder the landslide was Winston Noble. Even their names helped. Compare Winston Noble to Herbert Hogue for 10 seconds and you can almost figure the results. Damn it, cried Montag. What do you know about Hogue and Noble? Why, they were right in that parlor wall not 6 months ago. One was always picking his nose. It drove me wild. This reminds me, and he totally predicted this, of the election in 1963 between Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Short side note, I'm sure some of you guys know this, but before the televised debate between the two men, Nixon was winning. And then the televised debate happened, and people around the United States watched as Nixon was a little overweight, was balding, was sweating. Nixon had more experience. JFK was younger, but JFK was good looking, and he looked suave, and he looked good. And so after that debate, it changed everything. JFK won, and people say it's because of that debate that JFK won. And Ray Bradbury predicted it 10 years earlier. Okay. Well, Guy, said Mrs. Phelps, do you want us to vote for a guy like that? Mildred beamed. You just run away from the door, Guy, and don't make us nervous. But Montag was gone and back in a moment with a book in his hand. Guy? Damn it all, damn it all, damn it! What have you got there? Isn't that a book? I thought that all special training these days was done by film, Mrs. Phelps blinked. You're reading up on fireman theory? Theory, hell, said Montag. It's poetry. Montag, a whisper. Leave me alone. Montag felt himself turning in a great circling roar and buzz and hum. Montag, hold on, don't. Did you hear them? Did you hear there's monsters talking about monsters? Oh, God, the way they jabber about people and their own children and themselves, and the way they talk about their husbands, and the way they talk about war. Damn it, I stand here and I can't believe it. I didn't say a single thing about war, I'll have you know, said Mrs. Phelps. As for poetry, I hate it, said Mrs. Bowles. Have you ever heard any? Montag, Faber's voice scraped away at him. You'll ruin everything. Shut up, you fool. All three women were on their feet. Sit down. They sat. I'm going home, quavered Mrs. Bowles. Montag, please, in the name of God, whatever you're up to. What are you up to? Pleaded Faber. Why don't you just read us one of those poems from your little book? Mrs. Phelps nodded. I think that'd be very interesting. It's not right, wailed Mrs. Bowles. We can't do that. Well, look at Montag. He wants to. I know he does. And after we listen nice, Mr. Montag will be happy. And then maybe we can go on and do something else. She glanced nervously at the long emptiness of the walls enclosing them. Montag, go through with this and I'll cut you off. I'll leave. The beetle jabbed in his ear. What good is this? What'll you prove? Scare the hell out of him, that's what. Scare the living daylights out. Mildred looked at the empty air. Now, Guy, just who are you talking to? A silver needle pierced his brain. Montag, listen, only one way out. Play it as a joke. Cover it up. Pretend you aren't mad at all. Then walk to your wall incinerator and throw the book in. Mildred had already anticipated this in a quavery voice. Ladies, once a year, every fireman's allowed to bring one book home from the old days to show his family how silly it was, how nervous that sort of thing can make you, how crazy. Guy's surprise tonight is to read you one sample to show how mixed up things were, so none of us will ever have to bother our little heads about this junk again. Isn't that right, darling? He crushed the book in his fists. Say yes. His mouth moved like Faber's. Yes. Mildred snatched the book with laughter. Here, read this one. Now, I take it back. Here's the real funny one you read out loud today. Ladies, you won't understand a word. It goes umpity-umpity-ump. Go ahead, Guy. That page, dear. He looked at the opened page. A fly stirred its wings softly in his ear. Read. What's the title, dear? Dover Beach. His mouth was numb. Now read in a nice, clear voice and go slow. The room was blazing hot. He was all afire, and he was all coldness, and they sat in the middle of the empty desert with 3 chairs, and him standing, swaying, and him waiting for Mrs. Phelps to stop straightening her dress hem, and Mrs. Bowles to take her fingers away from her hair. Then he began to read in a slow, stumbling voice that grew firmer as he progressed from line to line. And his voice went out across the desert into the whiteness and around the 3 sitting women there in the great hot emptiness. The sea of faith was once too at the full and round earth's shore, lay like the folds of a bright, girdled flood, and now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. The cheers creaked under the 3 women. Montague finished it out. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkening plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Mrs. Phelps was crying. The others in the middle of the desert watched her cry grow very loud as her face squeezed itself out of shape. They sat, not touching her, bewildered with her display. She sobbed uncontrollably. Montague himself was stunned and shaken. "Shh, shh," said Mildred. "You're all right, Clara, now. Now, Clara, snap out of it. Clara, what's wrong?" I, sobbed Mrs. Phelps. I don't know. I just don't know. Mrs. Bowles stood up and glared at Montague. "You see, I knew it. That's what I wanted to prove. I knew it would happen. I always said it. Poetry and tears, poetry and suicide and crying and awful feelings, poetry and sickness, all that mush. Now I've had to prove to me. You're nasty, Mr. Montague. You're nasty." Faber said, "Now." Montague felt himself turn and walk to the wall slot and drop the book in through the brass notch to the waiting flames. Silly words, silly, awful, hurting words," said Mrs. Bowles. "Why do people want to hurt people? Not enough hurt in the world? You've got to tease people with stuff like that?" "Clara, now, Clara," begged Mildred, pulling her arm. "Come on, let's be cheery. You turn the family on now. Go ahead. Let's laugh and be happy now. Stop crying. We'll have a party." "No," said Mrs. Bowles. "I'm trotting straight home. You want to visit my house and my family? Well and good, but I won't come in this fireman's crazy house ever in my lifetime." I'm going to finish it out with him telling her off, and then we will finish for today. And I would usually scream this in class, but I don't want to scream this because it's 4 a.m. and I don't want to wake my kids up. "Go home." Montague fixed his eyes upon her quietly. "Go home and think of your first husband's divorce, and your second husband killed in a jet, and your third husband blowing his brains out. Go home and think of the dozens of abortions you've had. Go home and think of that and your damn cesarean sections too, and your children who hate your guts. Go home and think of how it all happened and what you did to ever stop it. Go home. Go home," he yelled, "before I knock you down and kick you out the door." Montague's fierce. So we are going to analyze that poem tomorrow. I'm going to try to do like a screencastify and go through it. And then tomorrow for your discussion board, you're going to be analyzing it. It's a really interesting poem. I know it's a little confusing, but we'll go through it together. One more thing real quick about grades. I need you guys to fill out that Google form that I posted on Monday. Just so you know, don't pick pass fail if you're doing well or you plan to increase your grade. Only pick pass fail if you know your grade is going to negatively affect your GPA. So with that being said, whatever you had in my class on March 13th, the last day we had school, your grade cannot go down from there, as long as you do all the work in e-learning. If you don't do any of the work and you had an A+ in American Lit, you will receive an incomplete and you'll have to take credit recovery or summer school. You have to do the work unless there's extenuating circumstances with technology. But if you have a good grade and you do the work, take the grade. Okay, if you're struggling in a class and you're like, girl, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pass it, take the pass fail and do all the work from here on out. You can increase your grade in American Lit. Let's say you have a C, March 13th, do all the work and your grade will go up, and that will help your GPA. If you have any questions, email me about grading, but you need to fill out that form for me by Friday because I have to let guidance know what you're choosing for American Lit. And you need to make sure you contact all of your teachers about your grades as well. I will see you soon. I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. If you need anything, send me an email. I'll talk with you soon.